Badass of the Week is produced by High Five Content. Yule Eve, late December, the 9th century. Northern Europe at the height of the Viking Age. A strong young man is walking through a snowy pine forest late at night. He carries the day's hunt on his back. It is sufficient to feed his family, though his work took him too far from home, and now he finds himself out late, with the sunlight gone and much distance yet to travel. The only sound is that of his burning torch and his footsteps in the pristine snow. Then, amid the quiet of the night, there emerges a dull rumble, almost as distant thunder. The sound grows, slowly and steadily, building towards a crescendo. It sounds as the rumbling of horses, riding at a gallop. But what can it be? Then, with a crack of lightning, the man sees a streak of green-blue light split the sky. From it emerges an 8-legged white horse, a creature so large it blots out the sky. On it rides a one-eyed Viking god, the mystical and fearsome All-Father, Odin himself. From his heavy steel helmet emerges a long white beard, and in his hands is the magical spear Gungnir, a weapon so powerful that it is said to be capable of killing god and monster alike. The ruler of Valhalla is mighty and terrible, his fierce visage dreadful to behold. His Valkyries follow behind him, the bloody spears of these brutal war goddesses sending forth bolts of lightning that illuminate the sky in vicious blue-white light. Their blood-curdling war cries are barely audible above the clashing din of their armor and the thunder of their horses. In the Valkyries' wake appears from the dusk a seemingly endless horde of fearsome creatures, ghost riders, elves, wild beasts, and spirit warriors, each riding to battle and singing the songs of their people. Terrified, the hunter collapses to the snow. He is paralyzed in fear, unable to do anything but cower and pray for salvation. The torch falls from his hand and is extinguished in the frost. As above him, the wild hunt passes by, fiery and terrible, an omen of the end of the world. Hello, and welcome back to Badass of the Week. My name is Ben Thompson, and I am here with my co-host, Dr. Pat Larish. And Pat, it's Christmas Eve, so happy Christmas Eve to you. Merry Christmas Eve, I suppose.
Yes.
It's Yule Eve, I guess. Also, if you were, in the old Norse tradition?
Oh yeah.
Isn't Yule the same time? Isn't there some kind of?
It is, yeah. It is a winter solstice celebration because lots of cultures decide that once the days get short and the nights get long, you need to pep it up a little bit to get through. So yeah.
Yes.
And I was I was really leaning into it and listening to Icelandic radio, and this is for ambiance.
Where do you find Icelandic radio?
So there's this website called Radio Garden, and there's this image of a globe with little dots on it, and you go to a dot, and they'll give you a list of radio stations that are streaming on the internet from that city. So I on the globe to Reykjavik and clicked on, Reykjavik, the capital of Iceland. It's like, oh, hey, there's like a dozen or so radio stations. And I was just kind of popping around. There's an ad for Coca-Cola in Icelandic. And I'm like, okay, I know exactly one word in spoken Icelandic. And it's já, which means yes.
Okay.
And then some of the music was actually American pop songs. Okay, fine.
Sure.
But they also played Frosty the Snowman in Icelandic. So that was fun. I've never been to Iceland, but, it looks like a really cool place to visit.
Yeah. No, I loved Iceland. I went there once many years ago, and I had an amazing time there. There's nothing in the world like Iceland. It's just kind of, if you like, just untamed wilderness, like so cool, like geysers and waterfalls, and the landscape is like nothing else in the world.
Yeah.
Everything's the entire country is powered by geothermal energy, and it's just, I mean, it's incredible. Like, I highly recommend Iceland as a place that people visit. I think people are hesitant to go there because it's called Iceland, and there's a story about this. Iceland is very beautiful and green, and Greenland is covered with ice. And the story here is that Iceland is literally just in the original, Old Norse writing for Iceland. It's spelled Island, like the way we spell island, but they just pronounce the S, so it's Iceland.
Oh.
We translate into ICE, but like it's just spelled island, like the way we spell island. And then, the reason Greenland is covered with ice is because of Eric the Red, who I want to talk about on the show at some point. But like, he's from Norway, and he killed some people over he was exiled from Norway for like, quote, various killings, and moved to Iceland and was living there for a while, and then got into more fights and killed a couple more people and got outlawed from Iceland. And he sailed west and he found Greenland. He'd heard like rumors of his existence, but he sailed out there and he found it. And then he came back and he told people in Iceland, he was like, I found this awesome place. It's called Greenland. Everything's green. You should follow me out there and we'll start a new colony out there. And people did. And then they got there and they're like, dude, this is not green. And he's like, oh, well, whatever. I'm the king here now. You got to do what I say.
Yeah.
So I will probably tell that story at some point on the show. But yeah, Iceland is awesome. I definitely recommend people go visit there. It's also kind of the source of a lot of the Viking myths. We're going to be doing a lot of Viking stuff today, which I'm very excited about because I love Viking mythology and I love Viking things. But a lot of what we know about Viking mythology comes from Iceland, actually, right?
It does, yeah. So in the 13th century, 1200s, there was a guy named Snorri Sturluson, and yes, his name was Snorri. And he is known for, well, these days he's known for writing down the Prose Edda or the Heimskringla, which is, these are texts mostly in prose that were his way of making earlier poetic versions of myths and legends more accessible. And if you try to read the poetic Edda, it's great. It's a lot of fun, but it's the sort of thing where it's poetry where you have to already know the myths to be able to follow it, Mm-hmm. So it's poetic in general. And also, if you ever read Beowulf in like high school English class, you know that in Beowulf, you have things called kennings, which are like, I don't know, circumlocutions or creative ways of expressing something. So a whale road is the sea. You've got that in Old Norse poetry too. A fierce stinger is a reference to a snake or dragon type creature. Anyway.
Yeah, there was one, like the kenning makes studying Viking stuff very difficult because to this day, we don't know what some of them mean. Like, because they're all like, it's like little things like what you said, right? Whale road, it's the road for whales. It's the water, right? And like, it's very poetic. And at the time, people knew you had to be kind of juiced into the pop culture of like 900s Iceland to understand what some of this stuff was. And some of it was like there's one that I encountered was like leg biter. And leg biter was not just a sword. It was this one famous king's sword. And it wasn't the name of his sword. It was just a nickname for it. But yeah, it was a leg biter. It was a sword.
I thought that was like a dog or something.
Sure. And there's somewhere like we can't figure it out. We can't figure out what these guys are talking about. And a lot of this is written in this style that makes it really difficult to track.
Yeah. So Snorri performed a public service and he knew what was going on. So he retold them in prose, which is actually fairly readable. I mean, yes, you could read the Old Norse and it's readable Old Norse if you read Old Norse, or you could read one of many translations that are out there. And
in Snorri's intro to his Edda, he's like, because, he retells the Eddas as they existed, but he also goes around during his lifetime and he finds all of these people. He's operating way after the Viking age. So he's operating Christianity. Christianity has already taken hold in Iceland, but he's going around and finding like the old guys and getting old war stories. and writing them all down and synthesizing them into a document. But one of the things that he does in his intro is he's like, everything that people told me, I have taken as truth, because nobody would recount such a tale in front of a chief that he knew to be false. So if a person is telling the story in front of a chief, then he must believe it to be true. So I have accepted all of this as truth. I'm like, all right, fair enough.
Okay. Sure. Yeah. Okay. So these stories are kind of mind-blowing. So Snorri says that Odin, the king of the Norse gods, the All-Father, and the other Norse gods were actually refugees from the Trojan War. And I did a double take. Okay, that's what he's saying. Okay. And as these refugees from the Trojan War escaped, they traveled north through Europe, and Odin founded the ruling families of Denmark and Norway and Sweden, or at least at whatever point. I don't know what point in time Snorri thought this was happening. Maybe, I don't know if he knew that the Trojan War was maybe 2 millennia ago. Who knows? Anyway.
A lot of important people a lot of important civilizations founded by survivors of the Trojan War, huh? Because Rome also, right?
That's true, yeah. Yes, Rome has entered the chat, yes. And this isn't even the only connection between Odin and other, shall we say, mythological milieu that we're going to encounter in today's episode. I like to think of it as the Odin extended universe. It's pretty extended, and that's even without taking into account Marvel Comics and the Marvel Cinematic Universe and Anthony Hopkins playing Odin
the comic book Odin, who was based off of the mythological Odin, but yeah. So we're going to talk about all of that, and Snorri is awesome, right? So Snorri, he's a trip. He's a World of Warcraft. He's like a big badass giant or something in World of Warcraft. But
is he?
Yeah, the real Snorri was like the most un-Viking of all possible Vikings. So he's operating in like way centuries after the Viking Age, but he was kind of this older, like scholarly guy. He's most of what we know about badass Viking myths and kings and war and all that comes from this guy. But I guess he was the law speaker for Iceland a couple of times. So for a very short period of time, he was like the most popular, most powerful chief in Iceland. But
so he had to know. He had to know the law, and he had to be able to like run meetings and stuff.
Yeah. But he lost every battle he ever fought, and was outmaneuvered politically multiple times, and then ended up being murdered by like 3 Vikings while he was cowering in his wine cellar. And his last words were like, "Please don't hit me." And so,
oh no!
And so that's not really what you expect from your badass Viking skald, but it's good he wrote it all down, because it's like in a lot of cases it's some of the only sources we have are the stuff that he wrote down, and it's the only thing we have to go on outside of like reading runestones. But a lot of what we're going to talk about today, because you mentioned Odin, we are going to talk about Odin and the Wild Hunt and why he may have been an inspiration for Santa Claus. But if that is true, if Odin is Santa Claus, he is not the kind of Santa Claus that you want to come visit your house tonight, because he is psycho and in charge of berserkers and Valkyries. And if you saw him flying through the sky with his parade of Yule reindeer, there was a decent chance he would just like have a heart attack and die of fright on the spot. So,
yikes.
Yeah.
Okay.
So we're going to do Viking Christmas Eve. We're going to talk about Odin. So please stick with us, and we'll be right back after this break.
Yeah, we've got some stories for you, and we hope you'll like them.
Oh my gosh. So in order to understand Odin and the mythology of the Vikings, Norse mythology, we need to start at the beginning. And with most myths, including this one, the beginning is like the universe is a primordial cosmic void of nothingness, where nothing existed. Okay, so that's where we start at the very, very beginning. The first living entity in Norse myth is a frost giant named Ymir. He was created when droplets from the river of venom froze in the realm of frost and were then heated back up again in the realm of fire. Ymir made friends with a massive space cow named Audhumbla.
Okay, yeah. And Audhumbla is Old Norse for something like hornless cow rich in milk. If you're keeping track, this is an example of how lots of entities and things have names.
Yes.
And the names mean things. Yeah.
We are going to see lots of that as we go on.
Yeah. Now, space cow. This is not like an astronaut cow. This is like a cosmic
cow.
Yeah. Okay. Cosmic cow. Okay.
Where did it come from? We don't know. We know where Ymir came from. He came from the River of Venom. Where did the River of Venom come from? Mm-hmm. Who knows? Unclear.
Yeah. Unclear. Yeah. Okay. The Big Bang. No. Anyway. So we've got Ymir, the frost giant, and we've got Audhumbla, the
space cow.
Space cow, cosmic cow. Yeah.
Yes.
Okay.
So Ymir drinks. You said rich in milk. Audhumbla provides a lot of milk. Ymir drinks it. And he is able, through some means, to replicate himself into a race of frost giants who are big giant. I mean, kind of what you would picture with a frost giant. Mm-hmm. They spawned out of his toes, armpits, other parts of his body. And then Audhumbla, she accidentally creates the Norse gods when she gets hungry and starts licking a giant salt block that she found. She starts licking this giant salt block she finds. Ymir's running around with his frost giants. But as Audhumbla starts to lick the salt block down, turns out there's a figure stuck in there, like a woolly mammoth in a Siberian glacier. She licks it down so that the salt block guy revives, like Encino Man, I guess. He comes out. He finds he becomes romantically involved with one of the women in the frost giant community, and they have a kid, and then that kid has another kid, and that kid is Odin. So, dude coming out of the salt block, no idea how he got there. His grandson, via a frost giant, is Odin. Okay. Odin's got two brothers. He's the oldest brother. He's got a brother named Vili and a brother named Ve. And the three brothers grow up, they get strong, and they attack Ymir. I'm also unclear as to why. They attack him, they kill him, they tear his body apart, they drown most of the frost giants in his blood. His blood then becomes the oceans. They turn his brains into the clouds. They turn his flesh into the dirt. The sky comes from his skull, and the stone and the earth comes from his bones. Okay, that explains that. Yes, and so that's where the world comes from. I don't have a good understanding of why Odin and his brothers did this or what the point was, but I don't know. It's unclear, but that is where the world comes from, is that Odin was born from a frost giant and a dude that came out of a block of salt that was licked a lot by a cosmic space cow, and then he and his brothers killed the first frost giant and mutilated him horribly, turning it into Earth. Yeah. And Earth itself is part of the whole geography of the Norse universe. And running through the middle of the Norse universe is Yggdrasil, the world tree. So throughout all of creation, there's this big cosmic tree. And the middle of the tree is called Midgard, or Middle Earth. I've heard of it.
Which might, you might have, and Midgard is where humans live. And apparently also that's where the ice realm is, the fire realm, the worlds of the giants, also known as the Jotun. Technically, like maybe some of them aren't actually giants, elves, dwarves, and the Vanir. So the Vanir are like another category of gods. We'll talk about them later. Midgard is Middle Earth, implying that there's maybe, like an upper area and maybe a lower area. So if you find a rainbow, it's actually a bridge called Bifrost, the Rainbow Bridge. And if you are able to climb the Rainbow Bridge, you might reach Asgard, which is the home of the gods. And that's where they live. They have their huge golden fortresses. They drink all the best kinds of mead. That's up in the branches. Now, down in the roots, deep below the earth, is the realm of hell, which is, well, not
I've
a
heard of
fun
that too,
place.
yes.
Yeah. Now, hell, okay, sometimes you think of like fire and brimstone. This hell is actually cold and barren, and you've got
It's kind of the Dante's Inferno, like when you get down to the lower levels of hell that's
actually,
cold.
yeah.
Isn't like
Yeah.
Lucifer like frozen in his own tears?
And here, not everything's frozen because you also have rivers of blood, and the souls of the damned walk through. They have to wade through that. There are venomous snakes that will spit poison in your eyes, if you are a damned soul, that is. And then, of course, there's a giant dragon named Nidhogg. So this giant dragon just lives in a pit with all these vipers and chews on the corpses of the damned. Now, Nidhogg is kind of a loner, but Nidhogg the dragon does have a friend, or at least business associate, who's a little squirrel named Ratatosk, which is Old Norse for drill tooth, which is a great name for a rodent.
Yes, I love drill tooth as a name for a
Yeah.
squirrel.
So drill tooth, our squirrel friend, is, well, if you've ever seen squirrels, you know that they scurry around a lot. And drill tooth, or Ratatosk, runs up and down Yggdrasil, because if you have a tree, you're going to have a squirrel climbing up the tree, and runs messages between the hell dragon, Nidhogg, and also this big, huge golden eagle who lives at the top of the world tree in Asgard. And these messages between the dragon in hell and the eagle in the home of the gods, these messages are insults.
Yeah, they just pass it. He just passes insults back and forth.
Yeah.
Hey, Nidhogg says you smell. He can smell you all the way down there.
Yeah. So let's follow Drilltooth the squirrel from the roots in hell up to the branches. So
Yes.
Tell us about Asgard.
Okay, so Asgard is the realm of Odin, and at the top of the Rainbow Bridge is the Palace of Valhalla, which lies in the center of Asgard. He is the ruler of the Norse pantheon, king of Asgard, the All-Father, the all-powerful god. He created all of reality out of the mutilated carcass of Ymir. He's the father of a lot of different Norse gods, but he is kind of unique among these kind of king of the gods types that we see in various mythologies, because he's a pretty weird, mysterious, magical entity. There's a lot about him that is shrouded in mystery, which is kind of cool. So he's the patron god of kings and rulers, but he's also the patron god of outlaws.
Huh.
He's like he's a god of war. He's got his Valkyries that go do his bidding on the field of battle. He grants his most devoted followers the ability to go berserk in battle. Like if you were a berserker, that was a magical gift bestowed upon you by Odin. He's kind of the blood for the blood god guy. And he rides an 8-legged horse named Sleipnir, and he carries this giant, spear that he can throw and it never misses.
Ooh,
but
that's convenient.
It's pretty sweet. You don't see a lot of spears as like the magic weapon wielded by like a powerful entity either. Usually it's a sword, but he carries a spear, which I think is cool.
Yeah, some gods have bows and arrows.
Yeah.
Okay, so a spear. Yeah.
Throwing spear.
And you say he's also the patron god of outlaws.
Patron god of outlaws, and he loves poetry. Some of the other gods kind of give him a hard time because he's really into magic. He's really into this type of magic called Sidir that the other Norse gods thought it was like, this is a type of magic that's just for women. Men don't use this type of magic. But he was super into it. He was into every kind of magic he could get his hands on because he just wanted to know everything.
He's secure in his masculinity.
He was secure in his masculinity, yeah. I mean, when you're the All-Father, I think that's probably pretty easy to be. But yeah, you didn't care. It was just like he wanted to know everything about every kind of magic that he could get his hands on. And he is the ruler of the gods and the king of Asgard, but he's gone a lot. There are a lot of stories where he's just off traveling because he's looking around, he's traveling the known universe, looking for spells, looking for wisdom, looking for new knowledge. And when he is around, he's a little bit inscrutable because he speaks only in poetry. He consumes only wine and he speaks only in poetry.
Okay. So he could be really fun at parties and also maybe kind of frustrating.
Yeah. Yeah, that's the kind of the vibe I get.
Okay, yeah. And also, if he's the if he's the patron god of outlaws, that might explain why Eric the Red, you know, he was an outlaw and he got kicked out, and then he also became king.
Yeah, there's a really good like Odin connection for Eric the Red, huh? Yeah, that's it. He was like he is, when you'll see him sometimes the way you see him in the way Anthony Hopkins portrays him in the movies where he's on this golden throne with the eye patch and he's very, I'm in charge. But then there's other times where he's just gone. Like, where's Odin? I don't know. He's off doing weird stuff. And he'll come back and he'll have seen something or learned something interesting, but he doesn't really talk about it. He doesn't do these like big giant speeches of things. He's just kind of like, he'll go off and he'll try to learn some new stuff. And then he comes back and he's like, well, I learned some new stuff, but he doesn't really talk about it or tell other people about all of his decisions and stuff. Kind of an interesting side to him, right? The king of the gods, but he's also a trickster.
Yeah, yeah. And you said that he speaks in poetry. He's also, in a way, considered like the source or the origin of poetry. He drank some magic mead, and some of it he spat into a magic vat, at least according to one story. And that mead is the source of good poetry. But where does bad poetry come from? Well, some of the mead he, quote, farted out backwards.
So he's it's the ultimate duality. He's the king of good poetry and bad poetry.
Yes.
Yeah, and so he is like, he's a warrior. I mean, he's definitely like, there's no mistaking that Odin is a warrior first, right? So he has the spear Gungnir, and he rides on an 8-legged horse named Sleipnir. But he is the god of magic and wisdom and spellcraft. He invented the written language, the runes that you see in Old Norse. He invented that by impaling himself on the world tree for 9 days until he came up with the idea of rune stones and gave the alphabet to the people of the world as a gift.
That's intense.
It's intense, yeah. And he's got that magic spear. I imagine that was it. He speared himself to the tree and sat there and thought about creating language or written language. And and that's what he did. And at one point, you almost always see him depicted with an eye patch, and it's because he pulled out one of his own eyes and offered it as a sacrifice to the keeper of the well of knowledge. Odin wanted to drink out of the well of knowledge and gain the power to see the future. But the guardian was like, you have to sacrifice something important. So Odin pulled his eye out and gave it to the keeper and drank from the well of knowledge and was able to see the future. But the future in Norse mythology is like a dark, terrifying, bleak place where everybody dies, right? He could see his own death in the future. He's going to be eaten by a giant wolf named Fenrir.
Yeah,
and
it's called the Twilight of the Gods, or Ragnarok, the Doom of the Powers. I mean, this is...
Yeah, everybody dies at the end of this story, right? There's like 2 humans that live and like 1 god, and that's it. Yeah. Everybody else in Norse mythology dies at the end of time. And, he sees this and it just makes him pretty grim and somber. And
yeah, me too. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I would need therapy, but yeah. Wow. Okay. So this is Odin. He's okay. That's what he signed up for. He's okay. I can handle it.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Okay.
And so that's Odin. He's the god of war, but also of wisdom. And he does takes some kind of extreme measures to gain wisdom. But he is kind of like this, sad, kind of grim, somber person because he has this experience. He's got some friends. One of his best friends is we had talked about the Vanir. They're like a lesser race of gods. That's what Tolkien calls them. Also, Tolkien's got Vanir as well. There was a Vanir named Mimir, and he was noble and wise, good friend of Odin's. Mimir's killed in battle, and Odin is really sad about it. So he cuts Mimir's head off, embalms it with magical herbs, and then revives it, and then talks to the head like an Alexa. So like he carries the head around, or like keeps it in a place of honor, and when he needs some wisdom, he can consult the severed head of his old friend, and it talks to him.
Okay.
That's kind of weird and cool.
Kind of weird and cool. Yeah, it's a new perspective on the phrase talking head.
Okay, I just need to pause here for a minute and let's hear from our sponsors. Odin lives in Valhalla, which is this giant palace in the center of Asgard, where all of the dead warriors go, right? You always hear the, like, you know, every death metal album is required to have like the word Valhalla listed somewhere on their track listing. And that was, you know, if you were a great Viking warrior and you were killed in battle honorably, you would die and the Valkyries would come and they would take your soul off to Valhalla, where you would live with Odin and you would train for Ragnarok, right? These warriors, they live in Valhalla. They drink mead. They eat pork from this pig that every time they consume the entire pig, it just regenerates. Odin lives there, and these warriors go out every day and they fight and they kill each other and they die. And then at midnight, they respawn and do it all again. And this is all their training for the big battle at the end of the world. And Odin lives there and he oversees all of this. So it seems to me like it's a big party all the time. Vikings are probably very happy to spend their afterlife just
big,
eating and fighting
with
all the
lots
time.
Of hitting.
And he oversees a lot of this. He is in command of the Valkyries, who we've talked about in the past. So the Valkyries are kind of his warrior, they're warrior women who ride to battles on winged horses, and they wear armor and they have spears that shoot lightning, and they choose these dead warriors, and they all live in Valhalla with Odin. He is married. He has a wife named Frigg, who, you know, has a few of her own myths, but she's very closely tied to a Viking goddess who's a little bit more well known these days, who's Freya. Freya, we know her as she's kind of a weird one because she's like Viking Aphrodite, but she's also like a war goddess in charge of the Valkyries.
Yeah.
She's also like a wizard. Freya and Frigg their names are written very similarly, and in a lot of myths, they're kind of interchanged for one another. They only really appear in the same room like 2 or 3 times over the course of all of Viking mythology. But in both scenarios, Freya and Frigg, they possess a lot of the same qualities as Odin and the Valkyries. They have deadly magic. They control the fate of men. They can create life. They can destroy it. And they are just really important pieces of Viking mythology. And they live in, or at least Frigg in various versions lives in Valhalla with him. He's also been associated, Pat, you found this with Skathi, the ski goddess. Is that a...
Yeah, there is a ski goddess. Her name is Skathi. She's the goddess of like hunting in winter in the snow, and she skis. And yeah, her name, some scholars think her name may be associated with the word Scandinavia. Some people think not as much. But yeah, there is a goddess of skiing. Yeah.
That's pretty cool.
Yeah. Yeah.
One of the, you don't see that in too many, not every culture has a god of skiing.
No.
To travel pretty far north for that. Odin has some children, the most famous of whom is Thor. And Thor and Balder are his 2 like most famous sons. He's also the father of Vidar, the god of vengeance, and several other gods of vengeance. As you said, he's the god of poetry. Like you said, he drank the mead of poetry. These 3 dwarves killed the greatest poet in the world, ground him up, and made mead out of his corpse. And
this is another example of someone making something out of a corpse. Okay.
Yeah.
We created the world from
in Viking
Ymir.
mythology, there's a lot of corpses.
Yeah, and we're making ale out of someone's corpse. Okay, like you do. Okay, microbreweries. Okay.
Yep. And so, so these 3 dwarves killed the greatest poet in the world, ground his body up, made the mead of poetry out of him. Odin turned himself into a raven, which is a thing he can do.
That. Yeah.
He flies out to there. and then I guess he flew out there and drank the mead, and that's where it comes from. So that's where poetry comes from, I guess.
Yeah.
He keeps some of it, so he has some of the mead of poetry left, and he can give it to skalds and poets and bards if he thinks that they're worthy. Okay, so he has other performance-enhancing drugs in his arsenal, not just the mead of poetry. We had talked earlier about the berserkers. And so that was, I mean, there's stories, like the berserkers are a real thing. Like this was a thing that existed in Norse, like in Viking culture. Like these guys they're called berserkers because they would wear clothing. The only clothes they would wear would be made out of like wolves or bears that they killed. Like they'd skin a wolf or a bear. It's called bear shirt is like where berserker comes from. So they'd wear a loincloth and like a cloak made out of whatever predator they'd killed. They would sit around a fire the night before a big battle, and they would drink some sort of mysterious concoction made primarily from mushrooms. They wouldn't sleep all night. They'd just get all worked up. They'd do all these like prayers to Odin. And then the next day they'd release these guys into battle and just stay clear. Like, let these guys do their thing. Get out of their way. Like you guys go. They would like bite their shields, like bite the wooden shields. And, there were stories of like a battle would be over, and like the battle would be over, and some of these berserkers would just be like hacking at trees with their axes.
Like they're still amped.
They're still fighting. They're fighting inanimate objects, and people would just be like, "Yeah, just let that guy go. Like he'll be fine. Just let him work it off."
Yeah.
Dude covered in blood, hacking at a tree. Like don't talk to him. Don't touch him.
Between him and the tree. Oh, so you've got berserkers among mere mortals, and then up in Valhalla, you've got the Valkyries.
Yes. So he's got poets, he's got outlaws, he's got berserkers, and he's got the Valkyries. The Valkyries are kind of what I was talking about earlier. They're an extension of his reach over humanity. They're like death goddesses, right? So this is where we get the idea of what is known as the wild hunt. And you see this in like Germanic and Viking culture where, the wild hunt is an idea that kind of transcends various faiths, ancient faiths across Northern Europe. But the Viking version of this is that Odin would summon his Valkyries, who, like I said, just look like they should be airbrushed on the side of a van or like on a heavy metal album cover. And these guys would, usually around winter solstice, around Yule, they would go on a ride through the countryside at night. So Odin would ride out there with his spear and his horse with the 8 legs and the eye patch and the big white beard, the All-Father. He would ride through the night sky, stampeding to the sound of thunder, and he would be accompanied by the Valkyries, who are on their like horses shooting lightning bolts. There'd be wind, dogs barking, they're blowing horns, there's stampeding of hooves, there's the clash of armor and weaponry. And then there would be like ghostly riders alongside them, whether that's warriors from Valhalla or ghosts or various spirits, elves, dwarves, whatever else. Flocks of ravens and like gale force winds would precede the ride. And, this would like, was a thing that they would stomp through the wilderness and terrify anybody who saw it. And this was the ride that they would do, on or around December 24th every year in Viking culture.
Coincidence? Well, it is. It's pretty scary.
Yeah, pretty scary stuff. The Wild Hunt was not Santa Claus going down your chimney putting toys under your little sister's stocking, right? Like this was some serious stuff. But like a lot of stuff, and like we're going to get into in a minute how this, because what ends up happening is this gets co-opted a little bit into Christianity. When Christianity is making its way through Northern Europe, a lot of Odin's stuff starts to get co-opted into Christianity. But that's not the first time that's happened. So Pat, you were telling me that like the Roman, it dates back way before that.
Yeah. So the Romans had this way of, they called it interpretatio Romana, or Roman interpretation, where whenever they encountered another culture with its own gods, the Romans would try to figure out, okay, your gods are real, and there may be, either like our gods or maybe different aspects of our gods. Maybe we're just using different names for the same god or something like that. So, for example, if you go to the town of Bath in England, there's a Celtic goddess named Sulis, and the Romans came along. They said, no, this must be our goddess Minerva. So they just started, building a shrine to Sulis Minerva. And when the Romans, when you have these interpretations, you have, this shows up in the days of the week. So the days of the week are named after, the Romans named the days of the week after their gods. And then how do you match up the days of the week named after Roman gods to Norse gods? Odin, he's the king of the gods, right?
Mm-hmm.
You'd think he would be matched up with Jupiter/Zeus.
Yeah.
Okay. However, Jupiter is the god of thunder and lightning. And there's a different Norse god in charge of thunder and lightning, and that's our buddy Thor.
Right.
So, so our Thursday is named after Thor because he's the thunder and lightning god. Now, which day is named after Odin?
So Wednesday is named after him because in certain Germanic traditions, he's Woden and not Odin. He starts with a W. And so Wednesday is Odin's day.
Yeah, which is cool. Okay, that's cool. But if you look at, say, Romance languages, what's the word for Wednesday in, French, Italian, Spanish? In Italian, it's mercoledì, which comes from the day of Mercury, or Hermes, who is the trickster god.
Yeah. I mean, that's the weirdest thing with Odin, right? Because we have him riding at the head of this wild hunt. We have him bringing berserkers to Valhalla and leading like armies, but he's not related to, like, they don't associate him with Zeus. Like, he's associated with Mercury. He is this trickster guy. He has this weird aspect of his character that is very unique among the like king of the gods archetypes that we see across most mythologies. And so, I mean, what we see with Odin and the Wild Hunt is that, when Christianity is coming to Northern Europe, there is this thing of like, they had this big celebration for the winter solstice, and Odin's a big part of that. But, what we have seen is Christianity shows up and they say, well, no, you're not doing that stuff anymore. We're not doing any of this pagan stuff anymore. This is going to be Christmas instead. Now, Jesus was born during Passover, which is not in December, generally speaking. But, Odin and this wild hunt thing, it kind of, there's an argument to be made, and that it kind of gets co-opted into Santa Claus, and his 8-legged horse becomes 8 reindeer. Maybe the Valkyries are reindeer. I don't know who's the reindeer here, but there are elves. Santa Claus does have elves that help him out.
That's true, yeah.
And they kind of synthesize him with Saint Nicholas of Smyrna, who's also kind of interesting because Saint Nicholas is the patron saint of sailors, merchants, repentant thieves, brewers, pawnbrokers, unmarried people. He's kind of known for, Saint Nicholas is known for being a little bit more of like a, really generous guy who liked to help out people who were less fortunate. So Saint Nicholas is a real person, and he would secretly give gifts to people who needed help, like people who were down on their luck, in poverty. He didn't really get all the credit for it, but he liked to secretly give gifts and stuff to people who he thought needed help. And there's a story that he once punched the heretic Arius in the face at the Council of Nicaea. I was double checking that, and apparently there's some serious debate as to whether that's true or not. But
it's still a good story.
It's still a good story. Yeah, I have thought for my entire life I believed that Saint Nicholas punched Arius in the face at the Council of Nicaea over the Arian heresy, which I liked about him. Even if it's not true, I like it about him.
Yes, you can still enjoy the story.
Yes. And so we see, from the Wild Hunt, we end up with ho, 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 and 8 tiny reindeer. And there are some similarities in the stories, which I find interesting, especially because in the original version of this, Odin is angry and angrily storming through the skies, like on some wild hunt, hunting down monsters and demons and stuff. And if you get in his way, you bet you're going to be sorry you did. Maybe that's why you're not supposed to stay up and wait for Santa Claus.
Oh, okay. Okay. Yeah. You do not want to face this. You want to be not around when when Odin shows up.
Yes. When Odin shows up and drinks your milk and eats your cookies, you do not want to be around for that.
Yeah.
He needs more energy to keep fighting demons.
Yeah. Yeah. And this is Odin, who apparently can see the future and can see like the doom of the powers, the twilight of the gods, Ragnarok.
Yes.
At the end of
So,
time.
when he drinks from that well of knowledge, he sees the future where, remember he pulled Ymir apart and drowned all the frost giants in his blood, but he didn't get all of them. And while the world is going and people are living and dying and the gods are doing their things, in the frost giant realms, in the realm of hell, in all of these bad areas, there are frost giants gathering for revenge. And there are fire giants, and there are demons, and there are monsters, and there are the damned, and there's all kinds of crazy, terrifying stuff on the fringes of the world in Norse mythology. And at some point in the future, there's going to be a showdown, right? Odin is marshaling his heroes in Valhalla and the Valkyries and the gods. And at some point, the dead are going to arrive. Everybody's training, right? They're eating food, they're fighting, they're telling their badass war stories, and they're listening to songs, and they're eating great food and drinking great mead. But at some point, this is training for the war at Ragnarok. And the demons and the giants, they emerge from the realms of hell. The souls of the dead ride in a ship called Naglfar that's like made up of the fingernails of the dead. The Norse thought it was weird that your fingernails still grow after you die. And so they were like, it's preparing for it to build a ship out of this to carry like all the dead people to fight for the bad guys at Ragnarok.
Yeah,
crazy
and
stuff.
In the Poetic Edda, they actually say you make sure your nails are trimmed when you die, because any parts of your nails that are still left, like whatever's still left, is going to go towards that ship. So you want to delay the building of that ship as much as possible.
Yes. Wow. Yeah, in the story, like
thought through the details. Yeah.
There's a giant wolf called the moon dog that like eats the moon and turns the sky into blood, and then there's this big fight. The fire giant Surtur like has a fire sword, and he smashes the rainbow bridge, and there's just fighting everywhere. All the gods die. Thor kills the Midgard serpent, and he's poisoned by it and dies. Odin is eaten by a giant wolf named Fenrir, and which is then killed by Odin's son, the god of vengeance, that we don't talk about that much. All kinds of crazy stuff happens, and Odin can see all of it. He knows what's going to happen, and he's kind of gloomy about it. And in the meantime, he's trying to gather whatever information and knowledge and prepare for this giant war at the end of time. And all of this, in my opinion, is pretty badass. Norse mythology is nuts and badass, and I like it.
Yeah, like he gets bad news, and instead of hiding and like dissociating, he's like, okay, I want to find out more.
Yeah, I want to be prepared. A doomsday prepper for great warriors.
Okay, yeah, that's one way of putting it. Yeah,
I'm gonna hoard berserkers who can help me fight this battle. He doesn't just have great warriors, though. You kind of did a deep dive on his pets, because he's got a couple of pets.
Yeah. So he's got the ravens. He's got 2 pet wolves, and for some reason I'm obsessed with the ravens. They're named Hugin, which means thought, and Munin, which is some Old Norse word that means something along the lines of intention or will or desire. Okay, and given that this is Odin who wants to learn everything and seeks wisdom, sure, yeah, that makes sense. And Odin has given them the ability to talk. They sit on his shoulders, and in art, in archaeological evidence, we do see this motif. And apparently what happens is at dawn every day, he sends them out into the world. They fly around, and they're collecting information. One source says that Hugin, the raven named Thought, looks for people who have been hanged, and Munin, the one whose name means intention or will or something, Munin looks for corpses, and I guess that is a way of acquiring information. And the ravens report back to Odin at the end of the day, and at dinner time, they give him a briefing.
While he's having the big dinner, the big Valhalla dinner, because in Valhalla you wake up, all the great heroes wake up, they all go out into this giant field and kill each other, and then when the battle's over, they all respawn, go back into Valhalla, and then they have this awesome meal. Like the greatest bard in the world lives there, and he plays music all night, and then there's like endless pork and mead, and I guess that's where Odin sits with his ravens and talks to them about, and like, you know. There is like a Disney movie in here where the ravens are cute and they're like the comic relief, but like,
for
the Vikings, like ravens are like black birds that eat corpses, right? Like they appear after battles to eat the dead bodies. Yeah. And that's like, okay, Odin has sent them here to this terrible place and like you said, they're looking for hanged people, and just one's generally corpses. The one's looking for hanged people. That's dark.
It was very dark. Yeah.
But I do like the idea of him talking to ravens. I think I find that humorous.
And I like the idea of Disney sidekicks.
Okay, so you have I'm looking at our notes here, and you've prepared some wisdom, some words of wisdom from Odin the Allfather.
Yeah, words of wisdom. So in the Poetic Edda, the collection of poems that Snorri Sturluson tried to digest into easily accessible prose, there's a section which is a collection of short poems, like 4 to 6 line poems, which are life advice, bits of wisdom in verse. And these are allegedly told by Odin. And I picked out a few, and I picked out ones that seemed to me to vibe with Odin as someone who's maybe the patron of outlaws, or also maybe someone who wants to give life advice to people who live in a world where there are outlaws. Some of this is advice on just not being a doofus, but it seems like a lot of it is also on being circumspect, being cautious. This translation that I'm using, it's Olive Bray's translation from 1908, which you can get online. And it's part of a facing page translation, so you can look at the Old Norse on the facing page. Anyway, one of the pearls of wisdom is, at every doorway, ere one enters, one should spy round, one should pry round. For uncertain is the witting that there be no foeman sitting within before one on the floor. And
that's good advice. You never know when there's going to be somebody there waiting to kill you.
Yeah. I feel like, I don't know, it's kind of a Tony Soprano kind of piece of advice. I don't know.
Was that you have that listed as number 1 in our notes? Is that the first piece of advice in the book?
That's the first piece of advice. Yeah.
It's the first thing he has to say. The first piece of advice for number 1. There's always going to be somebody trying to kill you. So you got to be ready for that.
Yeah.
Before you cross into a room, make sure there's nobody in there waiting to kill you.
Yeah. And, he keeps up with this, advice, piece of advice number 7, let the wary stranger who seeks refreshment keep silent with sharpened hearing. With his ears, let him listen and look with his eyes. Thus, each wise man spies out the way. All right.
Like you said, good for outlaws, good for cops too. Like this is good advice for detectives, right?
Yeah, or always just maybe anyone out walking after dark.
Yeah, fair.
Yeah. And, Odin's the god of poetry. He's he spends all his time doom scrolling.
Mm-hmm. And, yes, that's a really good way of putting it. Doom scrolling Ragnarok. and writing poetry about it.
Yes. Yeah. Writing poetry, which is maybe, on the one hand, maybe memorable, but also maybe not always as easy to understand as just ordinary prose. But anyway, he has things to say about talking and blabbing and holding your tongue. Piece of advice number 29. Too many unstable words are spoken by him who ne'er holds his peace. The hasty tongue sings its own mishap, if it be not bridled in.
That's good advice for everybody.
Yes.
It can be applied to doom scrolling also. Never tweet.
Yes.
Don't tweet anything.
Oh, yeah. I feel like there's a joke about trolls in here somewhere. Like, I don't know, because
Odin hates trolls.
Yeah.
He fights
Yeah.
them. That's what he's looking for in that wild hunt. He's trying to kill trolls.
Yeah. Now, this is Odin who, like, seeks wisdom, like, literally gave up one of his eyes to acquire wisdom. And yet, he also gives us this. This is piece of advice number 54. Wise in measure let each man be, but let him not wax too wise, for never the happiest of men is he who knows much of many things.
Well, that's advice that he's speaking from experience, right? He does know too much and he hates it. He doesn't
He's
like
learned
it.
this the hard way.
He's like, you don't need to know all this stuff, right? You don't want to open that door.
Yeah.
Just be happy. Just ignorance is bliss. Just be happy. Like, just learn what you need to learn.
Yeah.
Don't worry about this Ragnarok stuff. I got it. I got it under control.
Yeah. Need to know basis. Yeah.
Yeah, we'll figure this out.
Yeah.
Those are words of wisdom from Odin the High One, translated by Olive Bray, 1908. All right. Well, and I don't know what else there is to say about Odin. He's an interesting character, and he is our Christmas Eve badass for this week. We hope you guys enjoyed this episode. We hope that no matter what holiday you are celebrating, if any, this season, it's a good one. We hope you have a happy holiday season, a happy new year, all of that. We really appreciate you listening to the show and sticking with us on here. It's always great to be able to do this show for you guys, and we appreciate you. We are going to be off next week for New Year's Eve, but we will be back the first week of January with a new episode. So thank you so much, and we will see you then.
Stay badass.
Badass of the Week is produced by High Five Content. Executive producers are me, Ben Thompson, Dr. Patricia Larish, and Andrew Jacobs. Writing is by me and Pat. Story editing by Ian Jacobs. Mixing and music and sound design by Jude Brewer. Special thanks to Noel Brown at iHeartRadio. Badass of the Week is based on my website, badassoftheweek.com, where you can read all sorts of stories about other badasses. If you want to reach out with questions or ideas, you can email us at badasspodcast@badassoftheweek.com. If you like this podcast, please subscribe, follow, listen, and tell your friends and tell your enemies. And please leave us a rating. We'll be back next week with another one.